Welcome back, everyone, to Albania. Tirana, Albania. We're back. We're back today. And in our last video about Enver Hoxha, I promised that we would visit a former nuclear fallout shelter that is tunneled out of Mount Daiti here. And today, as you can tell by this creepy tunnel that we're walking through, that's exactly what we're going to do. Today, we're going to visit the Bunk Art Museum. So come along. Thanks for clicking on the video. If you want to help out the channel and help it grow, I really would appreciate it. Click on the like button down there, the subscribe button, and the little bell next to it to be notified for when new videos drop. It really helps the channel grow because it's going to help the YouTube algorithm recognize this content and spread it to other YouTube viewers. If you'd like to support the channel monetarily, I would appreciate that as well. You can leave a super thanks by clicking this thanks button here and give a small donation to the channel. I appreciate your support. So back to the video. Enjoy. So as we walk from the street back here to the entrance of the actual bunker, we can talk just briefly about this. This was a massive nuclear fallout bunker that the Enver Hoxha government that they built entirely in secret. And in fact, after Hoxha's death and after the fall of the communist regime in the early 1990s, 91, this thing was still a secret for like almost a decade, I think, maybe even more. Like, this thing was still not revealed to the public by the government, and it was only opened like temporarily for people to like visit and look around inside in like 2014, I think, and then permanently in 2016. And now it is the Bunk Art Museum. It's basically a museum showing off what the bunker was like inside, because it was designed, it's massive, it's over 100 rooms, I think 5 levels, and it was designed to be basically the refuge for all the government officials if a nuclear war happened. So we're here just outside the entrance to the bunker. It's actually right behind me. You see it back there? That's the entrance. And out here, I've actually set up a nice little fountain with some benches where we can have a brief talk about the history of this bunker. This thing was built in the 1970s, from like 1972 to 1978. So it's pretty massive, and it was built pretty quickly, relatively speaking, for its size. And this is at a time when the Albanian, like the Albania was not part of the Warsaw Pact anymore. They actually, in 1968, after the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia, they withdrew from the Warsaw Pact and became like increasingly isolated. And it's kind of a paranoid thing to build this gigantic bunker for a country as small as Albania, but also because like Albania didn't have any nuclear weapons, and they weren't part of either, you know, NATO or the Warsaw Pact at the time this was built. So yeah, like in the United States and in the Soviet Union, you had bunkers built like this for continuity of government, where like all the high, you know, the president and all the cabinet and high members of the government would go in the case of a nuclear war, right? But those were nuclear armed powers that had enemies that were nuclear armed powers, and Albania was not. They were not a nuclear armed power. They did not have enemies that were nuclear armed powers at the time that this thing was built, which is kind of what makes it crazy. So let's head inside. I'm pretty excited to see this thing. Look at these crazy... So this would be some, like, airlock, right? Giant concrete doors. Decontamination. This place is crazy. This is already nuts. Oh, here we go, right here. Enver Hoxha's room. Enver Hoxha's tea set. Enver Hoxha's book photo album with photos of Joseph Stalin. Enver Hoxha's desk. Enver Hoxha's chair, where Enver Hoxha's famous butt once sat. Enver Hoxha's bed, where Enver Hoxha slept. This is the thing, I don't know, how much time Enver Hoxha actually spent in here. If it was finished in 1978, he died in 1985, so there was at least 7 years. But there was no nuclear war. Enver Hoxha's bathroom. And if there was no nuclear war, then why would you come down in this bunker? Unless maybe you thought there was going to be a nuclear war. Can't really think of any time between 1978 and 1985 when there was like an oh shit moment where everybody thought there was going to be a nuclear war. We're pretty well into like disarmament. So from Enver Hoxha's room outside in the hallway, we enter some rooms that are exhibits talking about the Italian invasion of Albania in World War II and sort of progressing through the history of Albania at that time. Here's the official seal or crest of the Regno d'Albania, the Kingdom of Albania. But this is the fascist puppet state as part of the Italian Empire Kingdom of Albania. Here you can see uniforms of the fascist Italian Kingdom of Albania military, as well as here the uniforms of the Army of Albania under King Zog, the King of Albania before the Italian takeover. Here, landings of Italian troops at Durrës, the port city that is near Tirana, and photos of some of the original resistance members because there was a national liberation resistance that was formed, and you can see Enver Hoxha there on the bottom row, second from the right. And this resistance movement did fight guerrilla actions and other military actions within the occupied territories of Albania for a few years, from 1939 until 1943, when ultimately the Italians surrendered to the Allies and Italian occupation in Albania ended. Unfortunately for the Albanians, after Italian occupation ended, the Germans came in and took over. So there was German occupation for a year from 1943 to 1944 here in Albania. You can see here a German gas mask here on the wall. And this picture of Albanian fascists as part of a puppet German military. Now, the resistance against the Germans continued on as it did against the Italians here. A large part of the forces were the communist faction within the resistance, and this is a uniform of the communist military forces in the resistance. And ultimately, at the end of October 1944, there was a meeting in Berat, the Albanian city of Berat, a meeting of all the different factions of the resistance movement to organize for the impending withdrawal of the Germans, which was basically a month away at this point. It was at this meeting that Enver Hoxha was declared to be the provisional prime minister of the new provisional government that would take over once the Germans withdrew. And also at this meeting, there were letters sent out to different world leaders who were allies during the Albanian resistance. Even though the Allied armies did not liberate Albania as they did in many other territories. The Albanian resistance liberated itself. They received material supplies and intelligence and lots of other support. And so they sent out these diplomatic letters to Joseph Stalin of the Soviet Union, Franklin Delano Roosevelt of the United States, Winston Churchill of the United Kingdom. This is Josip Broz Tito, Yugoslavia. And this is a guy named Fan Noli. He was previously in the 1920s the prime minister of Albania. He's Albanian, but after a failed revolution, he was exiled out of Albania to the and he lived in the United States during the time of World War II. And they sent this letter to him as to thank him as a representative for Albanians outside of Albania, Albanians specifically in the United States that supported the Albanian Revolution in Albania during World War II. And these letters were not just letters thanking the Allies for their support, they were also letters with the intent of warming the relationship between what was going to be the new Albanian state and these major powers, in hopes that they would recognize the legitimacy of the new Albanian state after the end of the war. Here, the victory parade on Skanderbeg Square of the victorious resistance forces after the victory over the German occupation. Here's a picture of a young, newly minted Prime Minister Enver Hoxha in his military uniform. Here he is making a speech to all the masses at Skanderbeg Square. And this guy here on the left with the mustache, that is Mehmet Shehu. Mehmet Shehu is a very important figure in Albanian history. He was basically Enver Hoxha's number two, his right hand, his second in command. Now, here's an interesting story from World War II, from the era of German occupation in Albania. This is something that I knew nothing about, but they have a whole room dedicated to it. Basically, there was a U.S. transport plane, a C-53 transport plane, that was making its way from Sicily to Bari in Italy. It was carrying medics, nurses, and the flight crew of the plane, of course. They were blown off course by bad weather, and they ended up crash landing in Albania, which was occupied by Germany at the time. So they're crash landed behind enemy lines, and they were actually rescued by the Albanian resistance. And specifically, there was a guy, a member of the resistance by the name of Kostach Stefa. Now, this guy I didn't know anything about, but he was educated at an American school, so he spoke English. He was also, in his youth, a member of the, Albanian version of the Boy Scouts. So he was very good at exploration and survival skills. So when the Germans came looking for these crew members, these American medics and nurses who had been being sheltered by Albanian resistance, they needed to get them out, basically. They needed to get them out of Albania. But in order to do that, they had to trek across the mountains all the way down to a seaport in the south. And so the resistance assigned Kostach Stefa to guide them, and he did over the course of 63 days, harrowing journey through the mountains in the middle of winter also. And they were eventually evacuated from the German territory and safely returned ultimately back to Allied territory. And Kostach Stefa, very heroic actions, saved their lives. You can see here it was 13 Army nurses, 13 Army medics, and 4 flight crew members. And they have the names of everyone here on the plaque, as well as pictures of the different medics and crew members and nurses that were rescued. Now, the tragic part of this story is that while Stefa at the time was heralded as a hero of the resistance, after the communist takeover a few years later, into the hyper-paranoid early period of the Hoxha regime, where they were purging all perceived political enemies, because Stefa had attended an American school, and because Albania was now part of the Soviet communist bloc, and the Cold War was like really kicking into gear. Stefa was arrested as a collaborator, a Anglo-American collaborator, along with basically everybody that attended that American school. He was put on trial and he was sentenced to death. But at the last minute, his wife was able to make an appeal to some of the politically powerful people in the government that she knew, to commute his sentence from a death sentence to life imprisonment, which they did. And then they allowed his wife, Elena, and their children to visit him in prison for brief time. And after that visit, the regime had him executed anyway. It's a terrible and tragic story. And his body, his remains, were actually, like, nobody knew where they were. The government did not tell his family where they were. Nobody knew where they were until the 1990s, after the fall of the regime. His remains were found, they were exhumed, and they were actually moved and buried in the Martyrs Cemetery in Berat. Berat, the city where he was from. So that's where he is today. It's a really harrowing and tragic story that I knew nothing about. There are some books here in this case, inside this room. So if you're interested, I guess you could read one of these books, or all of these books, to learn more about the story. But a really interesting, a really crazy, but also very, very sad story that I knew nothing about until I came here. Outside, down the hallway, side hallway here, we can go to Mehmet Sheu's room, as well as the room of filters. Here's Mehmet Sheu's room. Pretty similar to Enver Hoxha's room. Gas mask here. Radiation-proof telephone, I guess. Safe in the corner. Map of Albania. Typewriter for typing your letters. Here it is, the sitting room. This is the exact same layout as Enver Hoxha's room. Here is Mehmet Sheu's desk, his chair where his famous butt once sat, his book that he was reading, I guess, and in here his bedroom. This is like totally dark. I'm sure you can't see this on video, but this is the bedroom. It's the exact same layout. Like I mentioned, Mehmet Sheu was like Hoxha's right-hand man. Wild. Here's the air filter room. It would have filtered the air, filtering out chemicals, radiation, I guess, through here. It said on the sign that all of this stuff was, Chinese made. Because at the time that this was built, Albania didn't have, they were out of the Warsaw Pact. Hoxha didn't have relations with the, trade relations really with the Soviet Union. They were getting most of their stuff from China. They had a much closer relationship during the 70s with China than they did with the Soviet Union. Now in these next rooms, they are talking about the building of the regime after 1945, after the end of World War II. Both the good things that the regime did and also the terrible things that the regime did. Good things, they built a lot of industry in Albania, including railroads. There's a picture here of one of the new railroads being opened. Here's a plaque commemorating the opening of the railroad in 1950. They opened it actually on Stalin's birthday to sort of as a tribute to Joseph Stalin, because Albania was part of the Soviet bloc at this time. And additionally, they invested in, Albanian culture, Albanian art displays. This is a ballet based on Albanian culture. And you can see people out here in Skanderbeg Square here. So the regime did some things that were beneficial for the people, but they also did horrible, horrible things to their own people. And this museum this part of the museum also talks about those things, especially the massive border security that they put all the way around the Albanian border to make sure that no Albanian citizens were able to leave the country. There is a room here coming up. Epilepsy warning, there are strobing lights in this room, but this is a recreation of what a border checkpoint may have looked like. So if you are epileptic or sensitive to flashing lights, do not watch this. Skip to the time and the timestamp. And in addition to the intense border security, internal trials, purges of political enemies, which we mentioned in the previous video, the part 1 of our video about Enver Hoxha. And you can see here pictures of the trials, some of the defendants sitting here. And additionally, Hoxha just created a cult of personality around himself with propaganda, regime propaganda. Him speaking here at rallies, Hoxha supporters marching in the streets with flags, Albanian flags, and his picture. Parades in his honor and to the honor of the Albanian Communist Party. These women dancing in these parades is very, very reminiscent of North Korea, and Albania was known as the North Korea of Europe. And so much this cult of personality so powerful that this is the scene at Enver Hoxha's death in 1985 at his funeral. A huge, massive crowd out to see his coffin. And you can see just how many people were there out here in Skanderbeg Square, right out in front of the National History Museum. And a line, this huge line that stretched for miles of people waiting to see, to view the one by one view the coffin, as well as huge crowds of people out in the streets when they heard of his death, out crying in the streets, weeping. Now, I have read stories that some, if not a lot, of these people that were out in the streets weeping were doing it performatively, in that you kind of had to do this under the regime. You couldn't just stay at home when everybody else was going out to weep for the great Enver Hoxha, who had just died. How true that is for every individual person, who knows? Some of these people were probably genuinely weeping. Others were probably doing it performatively. But it just goes to show you what kind of a cult of personality Hoxha created under his rule, his more than 40 years in charge of Albania. Down another side hallway, we can visit the room of an officer, as well as the room of the general, or our room of the chief of the general staff, as well as something called the gas room, which is interesting, and we'll get to that. There's the chief of the general staff's room. Front area it's basically the same layout as Hoxha and Sheu's rooms, except conference room, office in the back. No bedroom. This here is what an officer's room would look like, much, much smaller than like a general staff or Enver Hoxha or Mehmet Sheu's room. Just a small bed with the equipment on the bed that the officer would have been given, including the uniform, helmet, military equipment, and a gas mask. Now, interestingly, we mentioned the gas room. This is something I also did not know about Albania. They had a huge stockpile of chemical weapons, specifically like mustard gas, lots of it. And they were kind of obsessed with it. And this whole room is like in the year is dedicated to showing the obsession with chemical weapons. This full chemical protection suit with the gas mask, and pictures of Albanian military and citizens doing chemical weapons drills in which they would like evacuate or like clean up after a potential chemical weapons attack. Kind of creepy, very creepy, in fact. And moving on with creepy, the next room, this is the bunker room. I mentioned in the first video that there was a lot of bunkers built, a lot of concrete bunkers built in Albania during Hoxha's rule, and this room is dedicated to showing all of them, including pictures here with the different bunkers, a map that shows all the different bunker zones, especially along the borders and in different places. And then at this end of the room, this is like a monument that's designed here, a monument to the workers, the many workers who died during the construction of the bunkers. Something you don't think about, but they did, and they are honored here. That brings us to the snack bar and the gift shop right out here in a little cafe, because if you're going through the bunker and you want to buy something to eat or a little souvenir, you can do it right here. Now, this is right outside of the assembly hall, the theater that is inside the bunker that I've really wanted to see because I had heard about it before touring. Here is the assembly hall, a giant theater. Well, I mean, giant for the fact that it's, what now, 2 levels underground inside a mountain? The assembly hall. Because I guess if you're, like, trapped in a nuclear fallout bunker with Enver Hoxha and the rest of the Albanian regime, you gotta stay entertained somehow. Of course, it probably did not look like this, and what was playing on the screen over there was probably not this, if they ever were to have some sort of a show here. But man, this is like a stage. Does that mean they had like performers lined up? Did they bring like if there was in case of nuclear war, we're gonna bring like, I don't know, an Albanian like improv troupe down here, and they're gonna like call out for suggestions and, you know, name a place. Enver Hoxha's gonna be like, nuclear bunker. This is crazy. I had heard about this place, the assembly hall, the theater. It's inside the bunker. I had heard about this before I came here, and man, it's wild to see. And kind of creepy. It's creeping me out. Let's get out of here. Here's a recreation of a socialist house in Albania, 1973, this one, I guess. This reminds me a lot of the Communism Museum that we went to in Bucharest, in Romania. That was basically like a recreated apartment. That apartment was an apartment of basically like a very, like a wealthier or higher party official home. Work in progress. I imagine that's where the bedroom is. But man, the crazy thing about this bunker that I noticed, look at these light switches. These crazy bunker light switches. It's pretty cool. It is interesting to see this little like mock-up here. Reconstruction of a grocery store from the time of the communist regime. With the exception of a few short periods of relative prosperity, nearly all basic food in Albania was rationed through ration cards. Queues were organized. Whoever arrived first would mark their place with an empty bottle, canister, or even a stone, and then go back home to sleep till the store opened. Triska from 1957, the year when rationing was briefly suspended, allowed a person to receive 1.5 kilograms of pasta per month, 800 grams of rice, 600 grams of sugar, 1 kilogram of butter, 1 kilogram of meat, 350 grams of soap. There's the bottles and the bricks of people who've lined up pictures, actual pictures of the stores. That's one of the things that I heard about burek specifically. Burek, the delicious pastry that's like common to different places in the Balkans. And here in Albania, the burek is a little bit different. What I've noticed is like meat burek is available, you can get it, but it's not as popular as a lot of the non-meat burek options. Cheese burek, spinach burek, tomato and onion burek, bean burek. And I have heard that is actually just because like the rationing, it was just really hard to get meat. And so when people made burek during the Hoxha regime, they would make burek like for, like a whole generation basically of people made burek from whatever was available, beans, tomatoes and onions and stuff like that. And you end up with that being what ends up being the most popular type even today. This is one of the last sections in the museum, an exhibit to the children coming up during the communist regime period. And this room there's a lot of photographs of children during the communist regime period, in different youth programs, youth work programs, and scouts programs and things like that. But interestingly, in each one of these cases, there are like toys preserved here from the era, which I always find really interesting to see things like this, actual physical things that are preserved from the era, these toys and games and things like activity books and things like that kids growing up during the Hoxha era would have had and would have played with when they were kids. It's really interesting to see. It's something that it makes the real human experience really, you can identify with the human experience of kids growing up during the regime. Don't know that there are too many more exhibit rooms left, but man, there is something really creepy about walking down these really long hallways. It's cold down here too, of course, because we're like at this point 4 levels deep inside the mountain. It's really creepy. There are all these empty rooms along this this corridor here, which I guess possibly for future art installations, exhibitions, and things like that. But man, makes you think about how many rooms there were in this bunker. Just like what they would have been used for, I don't know. Storage, people, storage of people. I think we might be at the end here. We walk through all these. I have to like duck under all of these because I am too tall, of course. Yeah, this is it. This is the end. We've reached the end of the bunker. Man, that was wild. Let's get outside and we can talk about it. So this is it. This is where you exit. Exit the bunker after the bunker experience. Man, that was crazy. I already knew like that I was going to come see this thing. I had heard about it before I even came to Albania. I knew that I wanted to come see it, and did not disappoint. It's crazy. I will say, if you do plan to come and check it out, if you're claustrophobic, you're not going to like that place. That place is very claustrophobic, and we're here, I think, at a time when there's not even that many people there. If there were more people and it were more crowded, it would be even more claustrophobic. But it's intense. It's intense to see. It's intense to like think about that they made this whole thing. They built this whole thing because of like paranoia over, Cold War, nuclear war potentially. And the crazy thing about it, like I mentioned earlier in the video, they built it during a time of like détente, a time when like the risk of a Cold War, or the risk of a nuclear war between the Soviet Union and the United States was like significantly less. It really shows you like Enver Hoxha's paranoia, like intense paranoia. And man, I don't know what to say about it. One of the things that they did a really good job in there of showing was like the indoctrination of an entire society, you know, from children all the way up to adults, all the way up to like people at Enver Hoxha's, that huge scene at Enver Hoxha's funeral, people like weeping in the streets. It's why it was called, for a long time, referred to Albania, referred to as the North Korea of Europe. Just like a wholly indoctrinated people and a regime of indoctrination and paranoia, isolation. It's crazy. Anyway, I think that's going to do it. It's going to wrap up part 2 of our 2-part video on Enver Hoxha. Because if you come to Albania and you're interested in history and stuff like that, like I am, you kind of have to talk about Enver Hoxha. Because regardless of whether or not he was a hyper paranoid authoritarian dictator, he was a very important figure in Albanian history. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed that video. We'll see you in the next one.